remember that night as if it were yesterday, the night that changed everything. I was walking down the dark street, clutching my baby Levi close to my chest, trying to keep a steady pace. My heart was racing, not just from the brisk walk, but from the mixture of hope and anxiety swirling inside me. I had just spent my last few dollars at the lottery ticket counter, praying for a miracle that could change our lives. But fate had other plans for us that night. Out of nowhere, the heavens opened up, and rain began to pour down in sheets. It was as if someone had turned on a giant faucet in the sky, and we were caught right underneath it. Everything happened so fast, I didn't have time to find shelter. Before I knew it, Levi and I were soaked to the bone, facing the fierce winds that whipped through the empty streets. Each raindrop felt like a tiny dagger on my face, and a sense of desperation began to grow in my heart. I felt so small, so vulnerable in that moment, like a leaf caught in a storm. My eyes frantically scanned the street, looking for any sign of refuge. That's when I saw it, a house with its lights on, a beacon of hope in the darkness. I ran towards it, my feet splashing through puddles, my arms tightening around Levi. I pounded on the door, my fist trembling not just from the cold, but from sheer desperation. "Please, someone help us!" I cried out, my voice barely audible over the howling storm. Levi was wailing now, his tiny body shivering against mine. I could feel panic rising in my chest, threatening to choke me. As a mother, the fear for your child's well-being is like nothing else in this world. It controls me and makes me do things I never imagined. I can't let this continue, I thought to myself, feeling the fear grow with each passing second. Then, I heard it. The creaking of the door as it opened. A man appeared, his face etched with the lines of a hard life. He looked at me with a mixture of surprise and irritation, as if I was an unwelcome interruption to his evening. "What are you doing here at this hour?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. I could see his eyes moving from me to Levi, taking in our drenched appearance. In that moment, I felt so small, so desperate. I pleaded with him, my voice breaking, "We need a place to stay until the rain stops." I could feel the tears mixing with the rain on my face. "My son is only 5 months old, and we have nowhere else to go." I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Was it sympathy? Or just annoyance? He introduced himself as Peter, a 65-year-old man who seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. I could see the internal struggle playing out on his face. Part of him wanted to help, I could tell, but years of disappointment had made him skeptical and cold. I recognized that look. It's one I've seen in the mirror more times than I care to admit. Peter shook his head, his decision made. "I can't help you," he said firmly, his words cutting through me like ice. "I can't take responsibility for strangers." I felt a lump form in my throat, watching my last hope crumble before my eyes. I hugged Levi tighter, trying to shield him from the cold and rain. "Please," I begged, my voice trembling with desperation. "Just until the rain stops. We'll leave right away, I promise." Peter looked at me one more time, but his expression remained cold. He said he was sorry, but he couldn't help, and then he closed the door right in my face. I stood there in front of that closed door, feeling utterly defeated and exhausted. The tears just wouldn't stop flowing, mixing with the relentless rain on my face. I felt like the whole world was judging me, condemning me for my failure. Each raindrop felt like an accusation, reminding me of my inability to protect my own son. What am I going to do now? I thought, my chest tight with fear and a crushing sense of failure. Levi whimpered in my arms, his weak, hoarse cries echoing in the night. "It's okay, my love," I whispered, kissing his forehead, trying to convince myself as much as him. "We'll find a safe place," I promised, though I had no idea how I'd keep that promise.
Peter watched from the window as Allison walked away into the storm. He felt the weight of guilt, but quickly brushed the feeling aside. "Can't let emotions cloud my judgment," he thought to himself as he returned to his sofa. "I've tried to help before, but it always ended badly," he reminded himself. He picked up a book, attempting to focus, but the words blurred on the page. The sound of the storm outside seemed to echo within him. He couldn't shake the image of the woman and baby he had just turned away. Their faces kept appearing in his mind, a constant reminder of his decision. The patter of rain against the window seemed to grow louder, matching his internal turmoil. Peter tried to justify his actions, recalling past experiences that had left him wary of strangers. But deep down, a nagging doubt persisted, questioning whether he had made the right choice. He shifted uncomfortably on the sofa, unable to find a position that felt right. The warmth of his living room suddenly felt at odds with the cold reality outside. Peter glanced at the family photos on the mantel, wondering what his late wife would have done in this situation. She had always been the more compassionate one, often chiding him for his caution. The memory of her kindness only served to intensify his feelings of unease. He tried to return his attention to the book, but the words remained a jumble of meaningless letters. The storm continued to rage outside, a fitting backdrop to the turmoil in Peter's mind. He couldn't help but wonder where Allison and her baby were now, and if they had found shelter. The thought of them still out in the storm sent a chill down his spine, despite the warmth of his home. Peter stood up, pacing the room, his restlessness a physical manifestation of his internal struggle. He found himself drawn back to the window, peering out into the rain-soaked darkness. But Allison and her baby were long gone, swallowed up by the night and the storm. Peter's decision, for better or worse, was made, and now he had to live with the consequences.
As I walked down the deserted streets, the rain seemed to intensify, as if the heavens themselves were conspiring against us. The wind howled like a banshee, making each step a battle against nature's fury. My legs felt like lead, each movement a Herculean effort, but I pressed on, desperate to find shelter for my baby and me. Levi started crying again, his wails carried away by the merciless wind. I could feel his tiny body trembling against mine, shaking with fear and cold. "I have to be strong for you, my little one," I whispered, trying to soothe him, but his cries only grew louder, mirroring my own growing despair. I looked down at Levi's frightened face, his big eyes brimming with tears. My heart clenched painfully at the sight of my son so vulnerable and scared. A baby shouldn't have to endure this, I thought, guilt and fear washing over me like the relentless rain. As a pulmonologist, I knew all too well the dangers that exposure to cold and rain could pose to a young child. What if he gets sick? What if I can't find help in time? These questions tormented me, feeding my growing anxiety like fuel to a fire. The wind lashed at my face, my clothes completely soaked through, clinging to my skin like a cold, clammy second skin. Each falling raindrop felt like it was adding to the weight on my shoulders, an endless barrage of nature's cruelty. It was a hopeless situation, like being caught in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Levi whimpered and clung to me, his tiny fingers seeking warmth and comfort. I tried my best to shield him, covering him with my body as much as I could. "Hang in there, my love," I whispered through gritted teeth, forcing a smile I didn't feel. Each step felt like an eternity, and I could feel my strength ebbing away like the tide. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming, threatening to drown me in despair. But I knew I couldn't give up. Levi needed me now more than ever. "Please, God, help us," I prayed, my voice barely audible over the storm. I looked around desperately, searching for any sign of shelter. The empty streets seemed endless, stretching out before me like a cruel mirage, with no end to the rain in sight. I thought back to my comfortable life just hours ago, how quickly everything had changed. It was like a cruel joke, a reminder of how fragile our sense of security really is. I remembered passing homeless people on the streets, feeling a mix of pity and discomfort. Now, I understood their plight in a way I never thought I would, and the irony wasn't lost on me. As a doctor, I had always been the one offering help, and now here I was, desperately in need of it myself. The streets I had walked so many times before now seemed alien and hostile, every corner a potential disappointment. I thought of my own mother, how she always seemed to know what to do in a crisis. What would she do? I wondered, wishing I had her strength and wisdom now. But I was alone, truly alone for the first time in my life, with a helpless baby depending on me. The responsibility felt enormous, like Atlas carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. I tried to focus on putting one foot in front of the other, searching for any sign of hope in this sea of despair. My medical training kicked in, and I started assessing Levi's condition as I would a patient. His breathing was rapid but not labored, his skin cold but not dangerously so. We just need to get out of this rain, I told myself, clinging to that goal like a lifeline. I started talking to Levi, more to keep myself sane than anything else. I told him about the stars hidden behind the storm clouds, about the warm sun that would surely come out tomorrow. I promised him a future full of love and security, even as I wondered how I'd make that happen. But with each step, with each word, I felt a determination growing inside me. We would survive this night, I vowed. We had to. This storm, like all storms, would pass, and we would be there to see the sun rise again. With that thought, I squared my shoulders against the wind and rain, and pressed on into the night, holding my precious cargo close. Levi's cries were relentless, echoing in my ears and amplifying my sense of urgency. I held him tightly against my chest, trying to warm him with my body heat. I'll do anything to protect you, I thought, feeling the tears mix with rain as they streamed down my face. I knew I had to find a safe place quickly, each second felt critical, with Levi's health at risk. I kept walking, feeling my strength ebb away with each step. The strong wind nearly knocked me off balance, but I refused to stop. "We're going to make it, Levi," I said, trying to convince both of us. My voice was filled with determination, but fear still lurked in the depths of my heart. If only we could find some shelter, I thought desperately. Finally, I spotted the awning of a closed store and rushed towards it for refuge. I sat on the ground, holding Levi tightly, trying to warm him with my body heat. "It's okay, my love," I whispered, more to calm myself than the baby. We huddled there under the awning, waiting for the rain to stop. I knew this was just a temporary respite, and we'd need to keep searching for a safer place. As we waited, I was consumed with worry about Levi's health. I wondered if the baby could withstand this situation, and my mind raced with terrifying thoughts. What if he catches pneumonia? What if? These fears tormented me, keeping me in a constant state of high alert.
Meanwhile, back at his home, Peter tried to distract himself by watching television. However, he couldn't shake the image of Allison and Levi from his mind. "Did I do the right thing?" he asked himself uneasily, feeling a gnawing discomfort in his gut. He recalled a time in his own life when he had desperately needed help, but couldn't find anyone to lend a hand. "But you can't trust strangers these days," he repeated to himself, trying to justify his decision. His words sounded hollow even to his own ears, like a broken record playing the same tired tune. The flickering light from the TV cast shadows on his face, mirroring the conflict in his heart. He flipped through channels aimlessly, not really seeing what was on the screen. The sound of rain hitting the windows seemed to grow louder, matching the turmoil in his mind.
I waited for hours under that awning, praying for the storm to pass. Finally, when it did, I was exhausted but relieved to see the rain subsiding. With Levi still held tightly in my arms, I began the journey home. Each step was a battle against fatigue, but the hope of finding a safe haven for my son gave me strength. I realized we were closer than ever to a secure place for my little boy. When we finally reached home, a profound sense of relief washed over me. As I closed the door behind us, our small apartment felt more welcoming than ever before.
"We're safe now, my love,"
I whispered, kissing Levi's forehead as his cries finally subsided. I quickly stripped off his wet clothes, dried him with a towel, and dressed him in warm clothes to heat up his little body. "We need to get you warm, Levi," I murmured, feeling a sense of calm wash over me as we settled into the familiar surroundings. I nursed Levi until he fell asleep in my arms, his tiny body finally relaxing after our ordeal. Carefully, I laid him in his crib and covered him with a warm blanket. As I watched him sleep, my mind wandered to thoughts about my life. Levi's father had left us just before he was born, offering no support for raising our child. But I was a resilient woman, determined to do my best for my son and keep moving forward. "I love you more than anything in this world," I thought, gently stroking Levi's face. "I promise you'll never have to go through something like this again."
Meanwhile, Peter sat in his armchair, lost in thought. He couldn't help but wonder if Allison had found a safe place for herself and her baby. Try as he might to focus on his evening routine, the weight of guilt hung heavy on his shoulders. The memory of Allison's desperate pleas and Levi's cries echoed in his mind. He could still see them, two small figures braving the storm, and the image tormented him. Peter glanced at the clock on the mantel, noting how slowly time seemed to pass.
I was safe then, but I couldn't stop my mind from replaying the events of that stormy night. Rejection in the midst of the storm was painful, sharply reminding me of how cruel the world can be. But I knew it wouldn't be the last hurdle I'd face as a single mother. My strength and determination were growing, forged in the fire of unconditional love for Levi and his complete dependence on me. It was like I was building emotional muscles I never knew I had, each challenge making me stronger. I looked down at Levi, sleeping peacefully in his crib, and felt a surge of fierce protectiveness. The road ahead would be tough, I had no illusions about that. It reminded me of my residency days, those endless shifts that seemed impossible to get through. But I did it then, and I'd do it now, for Levi. I thought about the women who came before me, my mother, my grandmother, all the strong women who faced adversity and came out stronger. Their stories were my stories now, their strength flowing through my veins. I was ready to face whatever obstacles life threw our way. Come rain or shine, nothing would stop me from giving Levi the life he deserved. I could almost hear my grandmother's voice, telling me, "You're made of tougher stuff than you know, girl." And for the first time in a long while, I truly believed it. The future was uncertain, but my love for Levi was the North Star guiding me through the darkness. I made a silent promise to myself and to Levi, we wouldn't just survive, we would thrive. With renewed determination, I squared my shoulders, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring.
The next morning, Peter rose early as usual. Feeling the weight of his years in his bones, he slowly got up and made his way to the kitchen to brew a strong cup of coffee. As the coffee percolated, his mind wandered back to the previous night. He recalled the image of Allison and Levi in the storm, questioning if he had done the right thing, but quickly pushed the thought aside. He remembered times when he had helped strangers only to be betrayed. "You can't trust strangers," he muttered, trying to justify his decision. Peter took his coffee cup and sat at the table, feeling the silence of the house around him. After finishing his coffee, Peter prepared for work. Though retired, he supplemented his pension by working at a small local market. He left the house in modest but well-kept clothes. On his way, his thoughts continued to churn. People only want to take advantage, he thought, remembering how his generosity had been exploited many times. He sighed, feeling his inner bitterness grow. The rain had left the air fresh, but Peter was too preoccupied with his worries to notice. Arriving at the market, Peter nodded a greeting to the owner. "Morning, Peter," the owner said with a smile. "Morning," Peter replied in a monotone voice. He headed to the back of the store and began organizing shelves. His movements were mechanical, his mind wandering through dark thoughts. "This is for the best," he thought. "The fewer people you trust, the less disappointment you face." He continued working silently, trying to push away the memories of the previous night. At lunchtime, Peter sat alone in a corner of the store. He opened his lunchbox and began eating slowly, his mind still heavy with thoughts. Getting old and tired, he thought as he chewed slowly. Life hadn't been easy on him, and he couldn't expect others to be different. Looking around, he saw other employees chatting and laughing. "Don't need any of that," he thought, trying to convince himself that being alone was best. But deep down, he knew his isolation was just a shield against pain. As Peter sat there, memories of his wife flooded back. She had passed away a few years ago, and her loss had changed him profoundly. Since her departure, Peter felt that life had lost its meaning, and he felt a lump forming in his throat. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to push away the pain. She had been the only person he could truly trust. The memories of her were a mixture of sadness and anger. "Why is the world so cruel?" he asked himself, knowing there was no answer. His only family now was his grandson, Dylan. Dylan's mother, Anne, had been killed in a robbery, an event that had a significant impact on Peter. Anne had been his only daughter, and her death had made him even more bitter. Dylan was being raised by his father and visited his grandfather on weekends. When his shift ended, Peter said goodbye to the store owner and headed home. The walk home was lonely, but Peter preferred it that way. Better to be alone than in bad company, he thought, recalling all the disappointments he had faced. Arriving home, Peter collapsed onto the sofa and turned on the TV. The sound of the news filled the emptiness, but he barely paid attention. His thoughts returned to Allison and Levi. "I wonder if they're okay," he thought for a moment, but quickly pushed the feeling aside. He reminded himself of his life philosophy: you can't worry about strangers. Peter fell asleep on the sofa. Images of the storm and unfamiliar faces invaded his dreams. He tossed and turned as guilt and regret tried to break through his emotional barriers. "I did what I had to do," he tried to convince himself, but doubts lingered, disturbing his sleep. Deep down, he knew something in his life was wrong, but he couldn't bring himself to admit it.
The next day, I arrived at the local hospital where I worked, early as usual. My tired face couldn't hide the worries weighing heavily on my mind, but my eyes were filled with determination. As I entered the hospital, I greeted my colleagues with a gentle smile. "Good morning, everyone," I said, trying to keep morale high. I thought to myself, it's going to be a busy day, but we're fully prepared. The familiar atmosphere of the hospital comforted me, reminding me that here, I could make a difference in many people's lives. As a pulmonologist, I knew how serious respiratory problems could be and the special care they required. Difficulty breathing is one of the worst sensations a person can experience, which is why I did everything I could to improve my patients' health. Throughout the morning, I tended to several patients, each with their own victories, pains, and hopes. "How can I help you?" I asked each one in a kind, empathetic voice. I carefully examined each patient, listening intently to their concerns. While adjusting my stethoscope, I reminded myself, I can't let my personal problems interfere with my work. These people trust me, and I need to be here for them. My heart frequently drifted to thoughts of Levi, but I knew he was safe at daycare. As I examined an elderly female patient with respiratory issues, I felt a wave of compassion wash over me. "It's going to be all right, Maria," I said, holding her trembling hand. "We'll run some tests and take good care of you." I felt the weight of responsibility, but also the satisfaction of being able to help. "This is why I chose this profession," I thought, feeling a pleasant warmth in my chest. Being a doctor wasn't just a job for me, it was my calling. During my lunch break, I sat in the cafeteria thinking about Levi. "I hope he's doing okay," I thought, remembering his smile when we parted that morning. My heart was full of love and worry.
He's my everything.
I whispered, looking at his photo on my phone. The memories of the previous night were still fresh, but I tried to push them away. "I have to be strong for him," I told myself, feeling a renewed sense of determination. "Together, we can overcome anything." The afternoon was just as busy, and I devoted myself to my patients with the same attention and care.
"Let's run some tests,"
I said to a young patient struggling with shortness of breath.
"Don't worry, we're here to help you."
Each interaction reminded me of the importance of my profession and the impact it had on people's lives. "These moments are precious," I thought as I jotted down observations in a patient's chart. "I always need to give my best." After finishing with a patient, a nurse approached me and talked about the respect everyone had for me. She smiled and said I was a role model for all of them. I was deeply touched by the nurse's words.
"Thank you so much,"
I replied, feeling a bit embarrassed.
"I'm just trying to do my best."
I knew the respect from my colleagues was a result of my dedication and abilities. This is what makes me strong, I thought. Knowing I can rely on them. At the end of my shift, I headed to the daycare to pick up Levi. The moment I saw him, a smile lit up my face.
"Hello, my love,"
I said, scooping him up into my arms. Levi laughed and hugged me tight, instantly erasing all the fatigue of the day. This is the best part of my day, I thought, feeling joy wash over me at his presence in my life.
"You're the reason for everything,"
I whispered, kissing his cheek.
"Let's go home."
Back at home, I set Levi down on the floor and started preparing dinner. As I chopped vegetables, my mind wandered back to work and the daily challenges we faced. It's tough, but not impossible, I thought, considering the strength I found in myself every day. Every day is a battle, but we're winning. Watching Levi play on the living room carpet, I felt a surge of gratitude. I have so many reasons to fight, I thought, feeling more determined than ever. After dinner, I gave Levi his bath and got him ready for bed. I sat by his crib, watching him drift off to sleep. "You're my greatest joy," I thought, feeling tears of emotion well up in my eyes. "I promise I'll always protect you." As I gently stroked Levi's hair, I felt a deep sense of peace. Exhausted but with a heart full of love and hope, I lay down in my own bed. I thought about my work and my life with Levi. Every day brings new challenges, I mused, closing my eyes. But it also brings new opportunities. I allowed myself a moment of reflection, feeling grateful for everything I had. I'm blessed to be both a mother and a doctor, I thought, just before finally drifting off to sleep. As I lay there, teetering on the edge of consciousness, I couldn't help but think about how much my life had changed in such a short time. Just yesterday, I was out in that terrible storm, feeling lost and alone. Now, here I am, safe in my home with my son, surrounded by the warmth of my colleagues' respect and support. It was as if the storm had washed away my old life and left this new one in its place. I thought about the closed door on that stormy night, but instead of anger, I felt a strange kind of gratitude. His rejection had shown me my own strength, a strength I didn't know I possessed. As sleep finally claimed me, I made a silent vow to use that strength not just for Levi, but for all my patients. I decided to become an open door and a beacon of hope for someone in the midst of their storm. With that thought, I drifted off, ready to face whatever challenges tomorrow might bring.
On a bright Saturday morning, Peter woke up early, eager to spend the day with his grandson, Dylan. Since the passing of his daughter Anne, these meetings had become the light in his lonely life. Today's going to be a good day, Peter thought, trying to shake off the lingering ruminations. He hurried through his morning routine, feeling an unusual sense of happiness at the thought of spending time with Dylan. Peter drove to his son-in-law's house to pick up Dylan. As the boy ran out of the front door with outstretched arms, Peter felt a surge of love and pride. "Hi, Grandpa!" Dylan shouted with a big smile. "Hello, champ!" Peter replied, hugging his grandson tightly. "Let's go to the park. It'll be fun." As they walked together, Peter couldn't hide his smile. These moments are precious, he thought, holding Dylan's hand. At the park, Dylan immediately ran to the playground equipment. Peter sat on a nearby bench, watching his grandson play. So much energy, he thought, a smile playing on his lips. And would be so proud. Suddenly, Peter noticed Dylan clutching his chest and struggling to breathe. The smile vanished from Peter's face. "Dylan," he shouted, running towards him. "What's wrong?" A sense of dread began to overwhelm him. Dylan, who had asthma, was having a severe asthma attack. Peter started to panic. "Take deep breaths, Dylan," he tried to stay calm, but his voice was shaking. "It's going to be okay." But help was needed immediately. Dylan had forgotten his inhaler at home. The situation was becoming increasingly serious. Peter looked around and saw people in the park. "Please, someone help. My grandson is sick," he cried out. The panic was evident in his voice, and tears began to stream down his face. No, I can't lose him too," he thought, feeling completely helpless. A stranger who had been walking in the park heard Peter's cries and rushed over. "What's happening?" he asked, seeing the desperation in Peter's eyes. "He's having an asthma attack," Peter replied, his voice filled with fear. "We need to get him to a hospital right away." Without hesitation, the man said, "Come with me, my car is over there," pointing to the parking lot. "Let's get him to the hospital now." Peter nodded gratefully, a glimmer of hope piercing through his despair. He cradled Dylan in his arms as he followed the man to the car and got in. "Hang in there, my dear boy," he whispered, trying to comfort his grandson. "We'll be at the hospital soon." Peter's heart was pounding uncontrollably. Each second felt like an eternity, and the fear of losing Dylan was suffocating him. "Please, God, don't let this happen," he thought, hugging Dylan even tighter. The boy was struggling to breathe, and Peter felt his desperation mounting. In the car, the man drove as fast as he safely could towards the hospital. "It's going to be okay," he said, trying to calm Peter. "We'll be there in a few minutes." Still shaking, Peter looked at the stranger, feeling a deep sense of gratitude, but still in a state of panic. Thank you," he repeated, almost unconsciously. "I don't know what I would have done without your help." The man looked at Peter with a serious but kind expression. "I'm Edward," he said, keeping his eyes on the road. "Anne. You are?" Peter took a deep breath, trying to maintain his composure. "I'm Peter," he answered, his voice still trembling. "And this is my grandson, Dylan." Edward nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "I have a son the same age as Dylan, with similar health issues," he said, concern coloring his voice. "Kids need quick medical care. We'll be at the hospital soon, I promise." Peter kept talking to Dylan, trying to keep him conscious. "You're doing great, champ. We're almost there." He felt tears streaming down his face, but Edward's presence gave him hope. "I can't tell you how grateful I am," Peter said, turning to Edward for a moment. "Your help is truly a miracle." Edward's calm demeanor and quick action reminded Peter of the good in people, a stark contrast to his recent experiences. Edward nodded, driving with concentration and determination. "We'll make it," he said confidently. "Kids like Dylan need all our attention and care." As the car sped through the streets, Peter couldn't shake off his dark thoughts. "What if we're too late?" he thought, feeling the weight of guilt. "I should have been more careful. I knew Dylan had asthma, but I never thought an attack could be this severe. Please, God, just a little longer," he prayed, watching his grandson struggle to breathe. Each labored breath Dylan took felt like a knife in Peter's heart. Finally, they arrived at the hospital, and Peter rushed out with Dylan in his arms. "Please, someone help," he shouted, his voice echoing through the hospital lobby. "My grandson needs help." The desperation and urgency in his voice were unmistakable. Immediately, a medical team rushed towards Peter and Dylan. "He's having a severe asthma attack," Peter gasped. "Please, help him." Someone tried to reassure Peter, saying Dylan was in good hands now. Peter nodded, but the anguish in his heart was unbearable. After Dylan was taken inside, Peter broke down crying. Tension and fear had overwhelmed him. Edward, seeing the situation, quickly went to get some water. "Here, drink some water," he said, handing Peter a cup. "It'll help you calm down." Peter took the cup with trembling hands and drank. He felt the cold water pass down his throat, slowly helping him regain his composure. "Thank you," he whispered, feeling a mix of worry and gratitude. Edward watched as Peter took deep breaths, trying to pull himself together. The hospital waiting room seemed to close in around them, the sterile smell and harsh lighting a stark contrast to the peaceful park they'd left just moments ago. Peter's mind raced with memories of Dylan's birth, his first steps, and the countless times they'd laughed together. He silently vowed to never take a single moment for granted again, if only he could have his grandson back, safe and healthy. Edward's steady presence beside him was a lifeline, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, kindness could shine through. After Peter had calmed down a bit, Edward spoke up. "I need to pick up my son from school," he said after a brief silence. "But I hope Dylan will be all right." Understanding the situation, Peter replied, "I understand. Thank you so much, Edward." A wave of gratitude for the man who had helped them washed over him. "I don't know what I would have done without you," Peter admitted. Edward smiled, trying to offer some comfort. Before leaving, he said, "It's okay," and patted Peter's shoulder lightly. "Take care." They said their goodbyes, and Edward left. Peter was left alone in the hospital. Filled with worry, Peter waited for news. "Please, let Dylan be all right," he thought, sitting in a chair in the waiting room. He felt the weight of responsibility and guilt, but also hoped that the doctors would help his grandson. While waiting, Peter began to reflect on everything that had happened. The morning's events flashed through his mind: Dylan's smile, their walk in the park, the asthma attack. How did it come to this, he thought, feeling tears welling up again. He remembered Edward, the stranger who had been so crucial in helping them. "Edward didn't even know us, but he dropped everything to help," Peter thought, marveling at the kindness of strangers. He was truly a good person. Peter felt a mix of gratitude and embarrassment. "I don't know what I would have done without his help," he said, feeling the weight of guilt. He recalled Edward's eyes as he drove them to the hospital at full speed. "He saved my grandson's life," Peter thought, his heart constricting. "And he did it without expecting anything in return." This new train of thought brought forth a fresh wave of emotion, causing Peter to tear up once again. Suddenly, a vivid image flashed in his mind: a woman holding a baby in the midst of a storm. "I didn't offer shelter to someone in need," he thought, feeling his guilt intensify. "I turned her away because she was a stranger." Peter's heart clenched as he recalled that rainy night. The woman's trembling voice as she pleaded for help, echoed in his memory. I refused someone who needed help, and today a stranger came to my aid, he realized. The contradiction and injustice of his own actions weighed on him like tons of bricks. The guilt was overwhelming. Peter stared at the emergency room doors, waiting for any news. If anything happens to Dylan, I'll never forgive myself, he thought, overcome with regret. He knew he needed to reconcile with his past and make amends for his mistakes. I can't change the past, but I can learn from it, he felt a new resolve growing in his heart. Peter decided that if given the chance, he would never again turn away someone in need. I won't let fear guide my actions anymore, he vowed to himself. A fresh determination washed over him. Peter continued to sit in the waiting room, his thoughts racing through his mind. He reflected on how quickly life can change, how an ordinary day at the park had turned into this nightmare. The sterile smell of the hospital and the soft murmur of voices around him seemed surreal. Peter thought about all the times he had taken Dylan's health for granted, and promised himself that when Dylan recovered, he would cherish every moment. He also made a silent promise to find that woman and her baby, to make things right if he could. As the minutes ticked by, Peter's anxiety grew, but so did his determination to be a better person, a better grandfather, and a better member of his community.
I was in the emergency room, fighting desperately to save Dylan's life. The boy was in critical condition, and every second counted. Come on, Dylan, you can do this, I thought, using all my knowledge and skills to stabilize him. The effort was extraordinary, but I refused to give up. Time in the emergency room was intense, like a high-stakes race against an invisible clock. As a doctor, I knew that difficulty breathing is one of the worst sensations a person can experience. I was determined to do everything in my power to improve Dylan's condition.
Breathe, Dylan, breathe.
I whispered, focusing intently on the medical procedures. Sweat trickled down my forehead, but my concentration never wavered. It reminded me of my early days as a resident, those long nights when every patient seemed to be on the brink. But this was different, this was personal. I couldn't help but think of Levi, imagining how I'd feel if he were in Dylan's place. The thought sent a chill down my spine, but it also fueled my determination. After what felt like an eternity of effort and applying every bit of my expertise, I finally managed to stabilize the boy. He's going to be okay, I thought, feeling a wave of deep relief wash over me. It was like emerging from underwater after holding my breath for too long. The tension in my shoulders began to ease, and I took a moment to steady my own breathing. I looked down at Dylan, his small chest now rising and falling steadily. In that moment, I felt a connection to him that went beyond doctor and patient. As I prepared to speak with Dylan's family, I silently thanked whatever force had brought me here today. I had been given a chance to be on the other side, to be the helper instead of the one in need. It was a profound reminder of why I became a doctor in the first place. With a deep breath, I steeled myself for the conversation ahead, knowing that I was about to deliver the best news a worried family could hope for.
Finally, a nurse emerged from the emergency room and walked towards Peter. "Peter," she called out. Looking around, Peter stood up quickly, his heart pounding. "Yes, that's me," he answered with a trembling voice. "How is my grandson?" The nurse smiled gently. "Dr. Allison was able to save him. He's receiving the necessary treatment and responding well. We'll keep him under observation for a while, but there's no immediate danger. Dr. Allison did her best for him today." Peter felt a mix of relief and curiosity. "I'd like to meet Dr. Allison in person," he said, feeling deeply grateful. The nurse nodded. "I'll go get her," she replied and headed back to the emergency room. Peter calmed down a bit and thought to himself, "Allison, what a lovely name. She must be a good person." He had no idea who he was about to meet. A few minutes later, the nurse returned with Allison. "This is Dr. Allison who saved your grandson's life," she introduced her to Peter. The moment he saw her, Peter was shocked. He immediately recognized her as the woman he had refused help to on that stormy night. His face turned pale, and he was speechless for several minutes. The shock of this realization left him breathless. It can't be, he thought. He felt as if the ground beneath his feet was crumbling away. The waiting room seemed to spin around him, the fluorescent lights suddenly too bright. Peter's mind raced back to that rainy night, the desperation in Allison's eyes as she stood at his doorstep. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on him. The very person he had turned away had just saved his grandson's life. It was as if fate had orchestrated this moment, bringing them full circle to face each other again under such different circumstances. Peter struggled to find words, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The weight of his past actions pressed down on him, making it hard to breathe.
I immediately recognized Peter as well. I saw the recognition and guilt in his eyes, but I held no grudge. I simply smiled, maintaining my professional demeanor and compassion.
Your grandson is going to be fine, Peter, I said in a calm and gentle voice.
It was a severe attack, but he's stable now.
You'll be able to see him soon.
I could see Peter was embarrassed, so I tried to ease the situation. The most important thing is that Dylan is out of danger, I reassured him. Peter was clearly racked with guilt and regret. He stumbled over his words, saying he didn't know what to say. I could see how small he felt in front of me, and it tugged at my heart. He apologized for not helping me that stormy night, admitting he had been selfish and cold. Each word seemed to weigh heavily on him. "I'm so sorry, Allison. I was foolish," he said, hanging his head, unable to look me in the eye. He pointed out the irony that I had saved his grandson while he had done nothing for me. I looked at him with a compassionate smile.
Peter, there's no need to apologize anymore, I said gently. What matters now is that Dylan is going to be okay.
I reminded him that we all face difficulties and have regrets, but the important thing is to learn from them. Placing a comforting hand on his shoulder, I assured him that he had done what he thought was best at the time. I encouraged him to focus on being with his grandson now. I could see the relief and embarrassment on Peter's face. He knew my words were true, but I could tell the guilt hadn't fully dissipated. Looking at me with gratitude and respect, he thanked me sincerely. He said I was an amazing person and that he would never forget this. I smiled again and excused myself to return to work. As I walked away, I felt a mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to tell Peter about that night, about how his rejection had affected Levi and me. But I knew that wouldn't serve any purpose now. What mattered was that a little boy was going to be okay, and maybe, just maybe, this experience would change Peter for the better. I thought about how life had come full circle, how I had been given the opportunity to help the very person who had once turned me away. It was a powerful reminder of why I became a doctor in the first place. To help people, regardless of who they were or what they had done. As I returned to my duties, I felt a renewed sense of purpose and a deep gratitude for the twists and turns that had brought me to this moment.
Peter stood there, contemplating his actions and the lessons he had learned. He realized the gravity of his deeds and was determined to make amends. "I'm going to change," he thought, feeling a new resolve growing within him. "For Dylan, for Allison, and for everyone I meet in my life, I'm going to become a better person." As he waited to see Dylan, Peter continued to reflect on his life. "I can't change the past," he thought. "But I can change the future." He felt a new sense of peace and clarity about what he needed to do. "I'm going to be a better grandfather, a better human being." With firm determination, he prepared to embark on a new life journey, from regret to compassion and action, as he patiently waited to see his grandson. Peter took a deep breath before entering Dylan's hospital room. His emotions were running high, but he needed to see his grandson. He had to see with his own eyes that Dylan was safe. As he opened the door, he saw Dylan lying in the bed. The boy's eyes were weak, but he was conscious. "Grandpa," Dylan called out in a weak but relieved voice. Peter felt a lump in his throat as he looked at the boy, but he managed a smile and approached. "Hey, champ," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I was so worried about you." Peter sat beside Dylan and hugged him tightly. He felt relief wash over him as he realized his grandson was truly out of danger. "I'm so glad you're okay," he whispered, embracing him lovingly. Dylan returned the hug, feeling safe in his grandfather's arms. "I'm okay, Grandpa. Just got a little scared," he replied, trying to reassure Peter. But Peter knew he needed to talk about what had happened, both to teach Dylan and to atone for his own mistakes. After a moment of silence, Peter looked into Dylan's eyes. "I need to tell you something important, Dylan," he began, knowing he had to be honest. "Today, two people helped us in an incredible way. First, Edward, who quickly drove us to the hospital. And then, Dr. Allison, who saved your life." Dylan listened intently, his eyes wide with curiosity. "I want you to understand the importance of helping others," Peter continued, feeling the weight of his words. "A week ago, I met Dr. Allison in a very different situation," he said, his voice filled with regret. "She was in a storm, holding a baby, asking for help. And I turned her away. I was selfish and cold." Dylan's eyes widened in surprise, and Peter felt the weight of his guilt intensify. "I was wrong, Dylan. I made a big mistake. And today, when you needed help, it was these strangers who came to our aid," Peter said. Peter took a deep breath, feeling tears welling up in his eyes. "I don't want you to repeat my mistakes," Peter said, squeezing Dylan's hand. "When you see someone in need, help them. No matter how much of a stranger they are, never refuse to help. Life is full of surprises, and what you do for others often comes back to you in unexpected ways." Dylan nodded, absorbing every word. "I understand, Grandpa," he said softly. "I promise I'll always try to help people whenever I can." Peter felt a mix of relief and sadness. "You're a good boy, Dylan," he said, stroking his grandson's head. "You have a big heart. I'm very proud of you." Dylan smiled, comforted by his grandfather's words. "I'll remember, Grandpa. I promise I won't forget." Peter hugged Dylan again, feeling an inner peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. "We'll do this together, grandson," he thought, feeling the deep connection between them. As Peter held Dylan's hand, he felt the need to continue talking about what he had learned. "Dylan, life teaches us lessons in unexpected ways," he said in a gentler voice. "Today, I learned that kindness always finds a way, and even when we make mistakes, we have a chance to make things right by helping others." Dylan looked at his grandfather with admiration. "You're a good person, Grandpa. I want to be like you," he said sincerely. Peter felt tears flowing again, but this time they were tears of relief and hope. "Thank you, my dear grandson," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Let's be kind to people and never turn away someone who needs help." Dylan nodded, deeply moved by his grandfather's words. "I promise, Grandpa. I'll always help," he said. Peter knew this promise marked a new beginning for both him and Dylan. As night fell, Peter sat by Dylan's side, reflecting on the day and the lessons learned. "Life is full of surprises, my dear grandson," he thought, watching the sleeping boy. "And today, I learned that true strength comes from love and compassion." He closed his eyes, feeling an inner peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. "Thank you, Edward. Thank you, Allison," he thought, feeling deep gratitude towards those who had shown him the path of kindness. I'll become a better person, for myself and for Dylan. The next morning, Dylan was discharged from the hospital. Peter, feeling relieved, helped his grandson get dressed, deeply thankful that everything had ended well. "All right, champ. Time to go home," he said, trying to keep his tone cheerful, but inwardly he was determined. Before leaving the hospital, he wanted to express his gratitude to Dr. Allison more properly and sincerely. Peter took Dylan's hand and said, "Wait a moment, dear grandson. I'd like to talk to Dr. Allison before we leave." Peter took Dylan to the reception and asked where they could find Dr. Allison. The receptionist directed them to her office. As they walked, Peter felt his heart rate increase. "I need to thank her properly," he thought, considering the importance of this courtesy. It wasn't just gratitude, it was also about atonement. He needed to sincerely apologize for his actions on that stormy night. Reaching Dr. Allison's office, Peter knocked on the door with a slightly trembling hand. "Come in," Allison's gentle voice was heard. Peter opened the door and entered, followed by Dylan.
I was sitting at my desk, reviewing some patient files when they entered. I immediately stood up and greeted them with a warm smile. "Good morning, Peter and Dylan," I said, my voice filled with compassion. I asked Dylan how he was feeling, and he shyly smiled back, thanking me for taking care of him. Seeing Peter's reaction to my kindness, I could sense he was struggling with his emotions. He took a deep breath before speaking, and I could tell he was trying to control his feelings. Peter began by saying he had to come here to thank me again for everything I'd done for his grandson. But then he added that more importantly, he wanted to apologize for that stormy night. I could see the genuine regret in his eyes, and it touched my heart. I looked at Peter with understanding and told him gently that everyone has moments of weakness. I accepted his apology and thanked him for his words. I emphasized that what mattered most was that he recognized his mistake and was showing gratitude now. Smiling, I tried to convey a spirit of generosity that I hoped would resonate deeply with Peter. What's important is that Dylan is better now, and that we all learn from our experiences, I said. I saw tears welling up in Peter's eyes again, but this time I could tell they were tears of relief and gratitude. He thanked me, his voice choked with emotion, and grasped my hand firmly. I could feel the deep respect and admiration he had for me, and it was both humbling and heartwarming. As I watched Dylan absorbing every word of our exchange, I could see a new understanding dawning in his eyes. When he asked his grandfather if they would always help people, I felt a warmth spread through my chest. Peter's response, affirming that helping others was the most important lesson, made me smile. Observing their interaction, I couldn't help but feel touched by their bond. "You two make a wonderful pair," I said, smiling at them both. I wanted them to know that I was here if they ever needed anything in the future. Peter's final words of gratitude, calling me their life's savior, left me feeling both honored and slightly overwhelmed. As they prepared to leave, I reflected on how life had come full circle. The man who had once turned me away in my hour of need was now expressing such profound gratitude. It was a powerful reminder of why I became a doctor, to help people, to make a difference, even when it seems impossible. I watched them go, feeling a renewed sense of purpose and a deep appreciation for the unexpected ways life teaches us its most valuable lessons.
As Peter left the examination room, he felt a sense of peace and a new sense of purpose. He knew this experience had changed his life forever. "Let's go home, Dylan," he said, holding his grandson's hand firmly. "And let's live each day with love and compassion." Dylan smiled, feeling secure and loved. "I love you, Grandpa," he said, hugging Peter tightly. "I love you too, champ," Peter replied with a heart full of hope. One day, Peter was buying fresh fruits and vegetables at the local market. As he exited the market, he spotted a familiar figure. It was Allison, with baby Levi in her shopping cart. Peter paused for a moment, observing her from a distance. This is my chance to repay the kindness, he thought, feeling a mix of nervousness and determination. He approached slowly, trying not to seem too intrusive. "Dr. Allison," he called out with a shy smile. The bustling market seemed to fade into the background as Peter focused on Allison and Levi. He could hear his heart pounding in his ears, a reminder of how much this moment meant to him. As he drew closer, he noticed how Allison's face lit up with recognition. It was a far cry from their first encounter on that stormy night, and Peter felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. He realized that this chance meeting was more than just an opportunity to repay kindness, it was a testament to how much he had grown as a person.
I turned around and saw Peter, greeting him with a gentle smile. I was surprised to see him there, in such an unexpected place. As I adjusted Levi's blanket, I couldn't help but feel a flutter of emotions, a mix of surprise, warmth, and a touch of apprehension. Peter's smile radiated a warmth that was so different from our first encounter. When he offered to help carry my groceries to the car, I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. "That would be wonderful, Peter," I replied, my voice filled with appreciation. I explained that I had bought quite a lot, and with Levi, it was a bit challenging. As we walked together, I could sense Peter's eagerness to make amends. His gentle voice thanked me for trusting him, and I could hear the sincerity in his words. After loading the groceries, Peter began to open up about how meeting me at the hospital had changed him. His voice was low, almost confessional, as he spoke about realizing the importance of kindness and compassion. I listened carefully, touched by the honesty in his words. "That's truly admirable, Peter," I said, offering an encouraging smile. I reminded him that true change starts with self-reflection. Levi was staring at Peter with curiosity, and I saw Peter smile at my baby. When he commented on what a wonderful son I had and called me a great mother, I felt my heart swell with emotion. "Thank you, Peter," I responded, deeply moved. I told him that Levi was my greatest joy and that I was doing my best for him. As I stood there in the parking lot, I marveled at how life had brought us full circle. The man who had once turned us away was now here, helping with my groceries and praising my motherhood. It was a powerful reminder of how people can change, and how kindness can transform lives. I felt a renewed sense of purpose in my work as a doctor, knowing that sometimes, the impact we have goes far beyond the immediate medical care we provide. I saw Peter nod deeply, a look of understanding crossing his face. He told me he could relate, and I could see in his eyes that he was thinking about Dylan. His voice was soft and filled with empathy as he spoke. I felt a connection in that moment, realizing how similar our experiences were, despite the different circumstances. After closing the trunk, I looked at Peter and suggested we grab a coffee. I was feeling increasingly comfortable in his presence and thought it would be nice to talk a bit more. Peter seemed surprised but pleased by the invitation, and he graciously accepted. We walked together to a small cafe nearby and sat at an outdoor table, with Levi resting quietly in his stroller beside us. As we sipped our coffee, I could sense Peter's desire to share more about his life. He began to open up about how his life had changed dramatically after his daughter and passed away. I could see the old pain resurfacing as he spoke about Dylan being all he had left and how he'd been trying to be the best grandfather possible. I listened carefully, feeling a deep empathy for Peter's story. "I understand your pain, Peter," I said softly, my voice filled with compassion. I acknowledged how unbearable it is to lose someone you love, but commended him for his efforts to move forward. Peter smiled, seeming comforted by my words. He thanked me for teaching him the value of compassion and kindness. His gratitude wasn't just for saving Dylan, but also for the important lessons he'd learned. I was touched by Peter's sincerity. I'm glad my actions had such an impact. I replied with a gentle smile. I reminded him that we're all learning and growing, and that's what's important. As our conversation deepened, I could feel our connection growing stronger. I realized what a truly wonderful person Peter was, and I felt grateful for the chance to get to know him better. I knew there was still a long road ahead, but moments like these were encouraging. When Peter thanked me for giving him this opportunity, promising to honor it not just in words but in actions, I felt a wave of emotion. I smiled at Peter's transformation. I believe in you, Peter. I said confidently. Let's move forward together. As I sat there, with Levi beside me and Peter across the table, I felt a sense of completeness I hadn't experienced in a long time. It was as if the universe had aligned to bring us to this moment, to heal old wounds and create new beginnings. I thought about how our lives had intersected. First in crisis, then in healing, and now in friendship. It was a powerful reminder of the ripple effects our actions can have, how a single act of kindness or forgiveness can transform not just one life, but many.
As they parted ways, Peter felt a new sense of hope. He knew he was on the right path, and his life was changing for the better. Since that fateful encounter, Peter had become an indispensable part of Allison and Levi's lives. He felt he was building something more than just friendship. I need to be there for them, just as I am for Dylan, he thought, his heart warming as he considered Allison and the baby. Peter realized he was rediscovering the value of family in a way he hadn't before. One morning, Peter decided to visit Allison and Levi's home. I'll bring a toy for Levi and spend some time with them, he thought, feeling a mix of nervousness and joy.
I greeted Peter with a warm smile when they arrived. Good morning, Peter. What a lovely surprise, I said, cradling Levi in my arms. Peter smiled back and handed me a bag filled with toys. He told me he'd brought a present for our little man, and I could see the joy in Levi's eyes. While Levi played with his new toys, Peter and I sat in the living room. I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me as I looked at Peter. You've been such a big help to Levi and me, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I told him I didn't know how to thank him for everything he'd done for us. Peter's reaction touched me deeply. He insisted that he was the one who should be grateful, saying I had given him a chance to change. His words about Levi's smile being the best reward he could ask for brought tears to my eyes. As time passed, Peter spent more and more time with us. He became like a father figure to me and a loving grandfather to Levi. Watching Peter play with Levi on the living room floor, I could see how much these moments meant to him. I felt a warmth spread through my chest, realizing how our lives had become intertwined. I could sense the deep and genuine connection Peter felt with us. It was a bond he hadn't experienced since his daughter passed away. I saw the joy in his eyes when he said he was happy to be part of our lives. His sense of fulfillment was palpable, unlike anything I'd seen in him before. Peter started bringing Dylan to visit us regularly. I'd hear him say, "Come on, Dylan, let's go see our friends," as they left their house. Dylan loved these visits, especially playing with Levi and feeling my affection. One day, Dylan told me that Levi was like a little brother to him. My heart swelled with emotion, and I hugged him tightly. I told him that he was like a second son to me, my voice thick with feeling. As days went by, the relationship between Peter, Dylan, Levi, and me grew stronger. We spent weekends together, sharing smiles and memories, creating moments that would last forever. I'd catch Peter watching Levi and Dylan running around in the garden, a contented smile on his face. He'd whisper, "We're family," and I could see the deep, lasting peace in his eyes. It was clear that Peter had found a new reason to live, and it filled his heart with joy and purpose. I marveled at how this man, who once shut his door on us, now opened his heart so completely. With this newfound certainty, Peter embraced each day as a new opportunity to love and be loved. Watching this transformation, I felt a renewed faith in the power of forgiveness and second chances. It was as if the universe had orchestrated this beautiful symphony of healing and connection. I realized that sometimes, the family we choose can be just as powerful as the one we're born into.
If you enjoyed this heartwarming tale of redemption and second chances, we'd be grateful if you could give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing these touching stories that remind us of the power of kindness and forgiveness. Don't miss out on the incredible stories coming up next. You can see them displayed on your screen now. We truly appreciate your support and the time you've spent with us today. Thank you for joining us on this journey of hope and humanity. We look forward to seeing you again soon for more stories that warm the heart and lift the spirit. Until next time, take care and remember, it's never too late for a new beginning.